Hi there. Welcome to AfterTheWell, the conversational podcast where you'll learn to realize the everyday encounters that seem mundane have the ability to transform your very existence. My name is Melissa Lappin, and I am so glad that you've chosen to join me and my friends as we chat about how we hear God in our everyday lives, because we're everyday people. We might laugh a little, we might cry some, but know that you're going to go away encouraged by the stories that we share. Thank you for joining us on this episode. Welcome to After the Well. Hi everybody, welcome back to another episode of After the Well. Today I have my friend Isaac Fowler, who's an artist and all-around great guy, father of 3, husband to Lorrie Fowler. They've come in and out of our lives just because we live in different parts of the country and just different, parts of town and that kind of thing. And yeah, so Isaac, thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
And I would love to have the conversation with you around the big transition you made probably 2 years ago now, or a year and a half?
We're almost a year and a half now. We're coming up on a year and a half.
Transitioning from a full-time 9-to-5er with a great job to just hearing God and taking the leap to being a full-time artist.
Yeah.
So let's just jump in the deep end with both feet and
Sure.
just go there. Talk about that. When did that dream start? What did that look like? All the things.
Well, let me add just a little bit more on where I am today, because I think it'll be helpful context. So my wife and I were both artists. We do this together. This is like our full-time thing. We both create art. We sell art. And when did it start? So I tell people I started doing art when I was about 8 years old, but that's kind of a made-up number because I don't have specific memories of it.
Okay.
I mean, I remember at some point when I was probably only 4 or 5, my mom, because I was homeschooled, having me draw like cartoons for one of our subjects. Like I think it was like a science, and you had to draw these cartoons around science. And I just remember having fun with that. I remember enjoying it. I got my first oil painting kit, right? So like oil paint, you're getting pretty serious now. When I was 11 years old.
Wow.
My parents got it for me. And my parents were always very, very supportive of me doing art when I was younger. My dad, he was a photographer like in high school and college. And I think that given the choice, he probably would have done that like professionally for his career. But I have 9 siblings. So there's a literal busload of us. I grew up driving a 15-passenger van. And I'm on the young end. I'm number 8 of 10.
Yeah,
and
I
so
remember, yeah.
Lots of siblings before me. And so my dad got into software and kind of did something totally different. But I think it always was kind of something that he loved and appreciated, the fact that I was into art. Like I remember him talking to me about that when I was a kid. My mom's parents were into art. And what's funny to me, and it's always funny when you go back and recount stuff like this, because I have my memories of it, but my memories are kind of based more on my experience than maybe what literally happened. Because even some of it doesn't really make sense. It doesn't add up when you talk about it and you think about it specifically. And I know that there are things from my childhood that I've bounced off of siblings where I'm like, hey, this happened, right? And they're like, not exactly like that. Like generally sure, but not exactly like that. But what was funny was my parents were so supportive of me doing art. And yet I do remember when I was about 16 years old, talking to my mom and her kind of sitting down with me and having the conversation of, hey, one day you're going to want to have a family. You're going to want to provide for them. And I don't remember exactly what she said. And I don't want to misquote her, especially because she might come listen to this.
I hope she does.
Well, I hope she does too, and I hope she doesn't hear in this like I'm blaming it on her, because we all take things away from our own experience, and
Sure.
she may not have been saying it like that at all, but what I took away from it was I've got to figure out a real job. I probably can't do this professionally. That was my takeaway. And so in college, I kind of struggled. I was like, well, what am I going to do? I guess I'll do graphic design. That's an art degree. I'm still in the field. It's still creative, and there's colors and shapes and very similar in a lot of ways. So I went and got an art degree. And then after college, my life kind of took a complete left turn. I did design professionally, graphic design professionally, for only about a year before I got tapped on the shoulder and switched into like a business management position at the company that I was at. And from there, I had about an 11, 12-year career, not doing art at all, not doing anything artistic. I was working with numbers and spreadsheets and teams and software. And one of the things I actually don't know that I've shared with you about my story is that for that 11, 12 years, I felt a lot of guilt about that. I felt a lot of shame about that. I always felt, and I don't know exactly what this means, right? Like, I know a lot of the topic of this podcast is around like how we hear from God and what we hear from God. I tend to get like vague concepts and directions more than like specifics. You know, sometimes I do get something very specific, but with art, it's always just been more of this like urge that I should be using it and producing things somehow.
Right. So I was going to ask, because I was started thinking about it when you first was sharing being young. Do you recall just hanging out with God, painting or creating? Like you mentioned that your mom,
Yeah.
had you guys create around your school lessons and things like that.
Yeah.
But were there times where you just kind of sat with God and you were just making things and you didn't really have a grid for it, but you knew, like, because you just said that you felt guilty because you weren't doing what you felt you were called to do. So do you have like any recollection of that from being younger?
I wouldn't. I'm trying to think make sure I'm answering this question honestly. I don't, to me, like a worship experience when I'm like at a Sunday morning at church worshiping is like a totally different experience than creating art. To me, they're
Okay.
not very similar. And just it kind of hit me while I was thinking about that. Like, it actually feels more similar to me to being the person like in the church band. Like, I don't play in a church band now, but like I did play in like a worship team when I was in high school with
Yeah.
some of the homeschool stuff we did, and it's a different experience because you're ushering people and you're sharing things. And I won't say it's like that every time I create art, but creating art for me has never been like a just being overwhelmed by his love or passion or creativity. Like, it's always been, I don't know, it's been different than that. And I don't know how much of that is me kind of being stopped up emotionally versus what it was, but it was less of that. It was more just this, I could never shake, I could never shake the idea that like this was placed in me intentionally. Like, I believe that art is a skill. I don't think that people are like born with these magic talents or anything like that. But at the same time, I do believe that there is like a calling on my life to use this in some way. And I don't know exactly what that looks like. And one of the things I've wrestled with over the years and was an excuse for a long time to not pursue it was, well, maybe that doesn't mean that it's like a full-time thing. Maybe that just means it's a hobby and I'm supposed to do it. But the problem is, well, I never did it as a hobby. It was always the last thing on the list and it always got cut. But I struggled with that for years, and just kind of jumping back into our testimony with that. For 11, 12 years, I had a career where I was sporadically making art. Like every 6 months, I would sit down with the canvas and I'd make a painting or two, and then I wouldn't touch anything artistic again for 6 months or 2 years. And I always felt guilty about it. Like, I even remember sharing with a friend of mine at a small group. I was kind of jokingly saying, like, I kind of feel like Jonah, like running away from the calling on my life.
Yeah.
I used to joke, I was like, I gotta avoid like going near any big bodies of water because I might get swallowed up by a fish, which is corny, but that's my humor, so you'll have to get over it. So fast forward to about 3 years ago now. I think one of my excuses for never doing it more was always I don't want to take time away from the family. And about 3 years ago, my wife Lorrie started painting. She didn't grow up painting. In fact, her mom's an art teacher, and I think she maybe avoided it a little bit because it was her mom's thing more than her thing.
Yeah.
But about 3 years ago, she was going through like an inner healing workshop at our church. And one of the things they had her do was some sort of a creative expression, to sit down with the Holy Spirit and just create something. And so she was like, I'm going to do painting because I've never done that before. I don't want to do something I've already done before. And she loved it. Like, she absolutely loved it. And she is fantastic at it. Sometimes I get jealous because I've been painting for 25 years-ish, who knows exactly. And sometimes I feel like her paintings are better with just 2-3 years of experience. But we have totally different styles. But so she started painting, and, you know, God bless her, she started poking me in the ribs like, hey, why aren't you painting? I know you feel like you should be painting. I know you want to do this. I know that that's important to you. And so I kind of begrudgingly started painting again. You're going to hear in this story probably that I drag my feet a lot. I'm really kind of throwing myself under the bus here. But I was kind of like, okay, I'll start painting. So I started painting again, and I do enjoy painting. I love it when I'm painting. I just hate having to set aside time for it. And so I started painting again, and next thing I know, she's like, hey, let's join this like artist group online that does coaching and mentoring and helps people grow as artists. And I was like, well, I don't know. And she was kind of like, she really, really wanted to do it. And I honestly was like, no, 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 no. And then finally one day I was like, why am I saying no? Like, my big corporate job, the one thing I did get is I got a pretty good salary. And I was like, why am I saying no? Sure, let's do it. And so we did it. And I distinctly remember March of, gosh, what year is it now? So
It was 2019.
Well, no, it was 21 was the year that we started in that program.
Was it? Okay, I thought you started in
Mm-hmm.
19.
No, she had
Okay.
started painting before, but it wasn't until March of 2021. As long as I'm getting my years right. I don't know. I'm
Yeah,
bad with the year math.
Yeah, it was 2 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. We had just joined this program, and they're doing like this big meetup conference event that was pretty affordable. So I was like, sure, let's go. It sounds fun. I've got tons of vacation time I'm not using. It's cheap. It'll be a good way to explore and keep stepping, keeps taking steps in this journey to see wherever God takes it. My heart was softening up a little bit of like, okay, I'll take some small steps that are very low risk to me. I'll go to this conference. It's not that big of a deal.
So with that, obviously Holy Spirit was talking to you through Lorrie.
Yes,
and poking
which
you
I
in
think
the
he does a
ribs through
lot,
Lorrie.
as much as I hate it.
Yeah, and we had a pastor that would say, God, that Holy Spirit talks to us through our spouse.
Mm-hmm.
We just don't want to listen because we don't want to admit they're right.
Yes. No,
But-
that's very true. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
so on your own, what were you hearing from the Lord? I mean, was Lorrie confirming things, or was she making you have different conversations with God about your art?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I was still fingers in my ears at that point in
Okay.
regards to my art. There are other things that I'd pray about and I'd hear about, but that was one thing where I think honestly I just had so much kind of hardness in my heart around it and some
Okay.
healing to do that I wasn't really totally open to it. Although I should qualify that actually around that time, I always forget this is part of the story. Around that time as well, I had started to go see like a therapist just because I was like, something's not quite adding up. And, my mom does like prayer counseling and stuff. So like, I've never had that. I mean, I still have some of that stigma against therapy because I think everyone has some, but I have less than the average person does. Because a lot of people look at it, it's like, oh, well, you must be completely broken if you're going to therapy.
Right, yeah. Well,
Not
and
necessarily.
sadly, that's the church's mentality on it,
Right.
is they, that and medication and all the things. You just need to pray more. You need to have more faith. And you're just like,
Right.
Okay, let's move
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
You can think that. And because, like, when I do the counseling on one of the sheets, it just asks, are you on any medication? Because, and there's no shame in that. So anybody out
Right.
there listening to this podcast, this is a good time to state that you do what you need to do
Yeah.
to get stable and level and in a place where you can rest in your heart and connect with God.
Yeah.
And then let God take care of any medication that you're on or
Yeah.
all the things. Talking to people is necessary. And if you're in
It
a
really
church
is.
that tells you that you shouldn't and you just should have more faith, you should probably find another church. There, I said it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, therapy is amazing. I mean, I would highly recommend it. It's been life changing for me. But I remember the therapist. I remember one day sitting with him and we were talking and we had worked through all sorts of stuff. I was starting to realize I had all sorts of deep rooted fear around like provision and finances.
Mm-hmm.
And my family was like super poor for a couple of years when I was really little. And I think I picked up a lot of beliefs during that time
Sure.
that I wasn't even aware of.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Well, then
and we
also
started,
the
huh?
starving artist thing, that
Oh,
your mom,
totally. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that's a big thing, which has killed a lot of
Yes.
creativity in a lot of
Yes.
people for centuries. You
Yeah.
can't make money at that. Get a real job.
Yeah. I think it's one of the biggest lies of the enemy in that area.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I remember sitting with him one day after unraveling a lot of the stuff, and I remember one time talking to him, and somehow the topic got to like my art and how I like doing art, and I felt a calling to do it. And he was like, "Well, why don't you do it?" And I was like, "You can't really live as an artist." And he was like, "Well, who told you that? Why do you believe that?" And I was like, "Well,
Yeah.
it kind of pissed me off because I was like, I don't have a good answer to that question,
Right? Oh, I
Like,
don't know.
yeah. So that had kind of been happening in the background at this time as well.
Okay.
And so I was kind of softening up and I was like, okay, let's go to this conference. And I remember, God bless him, meeting Trent Freeman, who's another artist, and Robbie and a couple other artists that are in this program as well. And I remember kind of walking away from this conference because it was a conference for artists, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a mixture of there was brand new artists that were wanting to get into business. There were some people that were kind of emerging and
Mm-hmm.
weren't full time, but maybe one day. But there was actually a group of full time artists as well, and
A
there was
hardcore artist, yeah, just for
yeah,
listeners. I'm part of that group too. And we'll go ahead and throw a plug out there. It's Matt Tommy's Thriving Christian Artist, because
yes,
if you're an artist or a creative of any type, because it's not just, it's like songwriters,
hmm
musicians, like dancer, like everybody in creativity
yeah,
world. And that's how we got reconnected again, because I saw
yes, yeah,
y'all's name on the list and I'm like, oh my god, no way, I didn't know you guys were part of this group.
yeah,
And then Lori's mom is part of the group and everything,
yeah,
and so we
that's right,
got reconnected after a couple years because y'all moved away from the area. So
right,
you know and I think it's cool, and thinking about it now, I give you kudos for showing up, because it's mostly women.
hmm
Which
Well, I didn't know
we
that when I signed up.
right, we have very few men
Yeah,
that kind, because women do those things, women do the
right,
conferences, women do the
right,
things, right? But to see that group of strong, confident men
hmm
that you got connected with,
yes, yeah,
who are established artists, and that's, to me, that's just and you can go from here wherever you want,
hmm
but having I think it's really cool
hmm
that God set you up like that.
yeah,
That the
total
struggle
setup.
for being like, I can't make any money at this, to meeting artists that make thousands on pieces of art and get
Yes,
sponsored by paint companies, and
yes,
people throw things at them and they get hired for the crazy things,
yeah,
murals on side of buildings and all the stuff. And so I just think it's just the kindness of God that
yes,
he just like, okay, see, Isaac, here, look, yes you can, you know
yes.
so go ahead with finish that
No, I
experience.
mean that's exactly it. I mean, I don't know what my expectation was coming into the conference,
Yeah.
um, but I was, walking away from there. And sure, it's not like it's like half the conference, but that's normal. In any conference, there's always going to be a few people who are really have been able to take hold of it and kind of move forward. But I walked away. I was like, it's not just Matt Tommy, the guy running this conference, who it's worked for him, and now he's just out there cashing checks, and everyone else wants to do it but can't do it. It's like, no, like I met like handfuls of full-time professional artists. None of them looked like they were starving, you know.
Right.
I'm not trying to say they were overweight. That wasn't the point. But it's like they weren't starving. They were just
Yeah.
living their life. And I remember just kind of walking away, kind of blown away, and I was like, I think I missed something. Like, I guess I could kind of always looked at art like this thing, like you have to win like the spiritual lottery. You have to have some, mega millions, God's favor to be a full-time artist. And for the rest of us, we just have to have a day job, right?
Right.
Like that's kind of the belief I had adopted. And so I kind of walked out of there a little bit kind of shooken up. And um, this story just has so many layers and steps to it. So I apologize. I feel like I'm rambling.
We got time. It's my podcast. We can make a part 2 if we want to. You talk
There we
about
go.
whatever you want to talk about.
And feel free to edit out if this part's boring later.
No, we're
But
good. I don't edit. What we get is what we get.
all right, we'll do it live. And so I kind of walked away from there, and it put like a crack in the spiritual armor, like the negative spiritual armor, if you're right,
Sure.
like the spiritual
Your
wall,
defenses
not the
were
armor.
coming down.
Yeah, it put a crack in it, and so there was light coming in, but it wasn't gone, right? And so I kind of walked out of there, and Lori was like, "This is so exciting! Like we should do this," because honestly, around this time, there was some stuff with my current job that just was not going very well. And we were already kind of looking at things going, I love my job, I love what I do, but at the same time, it's killing me.
Yeah.
And so, what change can we make? And I had been dragging my feet, not wanting to make a change. The thing I had been saying for a long time was, I want to, the projects that I'm working on, I believe so deeply in, and I still believe deeply in, and I wanted to see them through. And around that time, Lori was like, well, okay, I get that, but it'd be really cool if we could do art full time. I was like, well, I agree, but it's, in my head, I'm like, it's not going to happen. And she was like, well, what would it take? Like, what would have to be true for us to do it full time? Which is a great trick that I use on people all the time, and I can't believe she used it on me successfully. But I sat down and I was like, okay, I'll tell you what, if we can save up this much money for a transition, because it's going to take us some time to build up this business, and if we can get our business up to this point, like, I'd be okay, as much as I would hate it, because I would feel like I'm leaving something that I love. I'd be okay leaving, and so we had been saving up for a while. We had been kind of working towards that. We'd been building up our business, and around like, I think it was 1 or 2 weeks after this conference where I met all these other people. In my case, it was mostly men, because Matt Tommy, the guy who runs it, was like introducing me to all the other men, because he's like, oh yeah, we got another guy in the group, because
Right.
he loves it too, because he also knows it's all women. So I met all these great men and women that were full-time artists, and like a week after that, I go into work, and I mean, it wasn't a complete shock, because like I said, some stuff had become very uncomfortable, but it was kind of a shock that my boss sat me down one morning, was like, hey, here's the thing. We love you. We want you to stay here. But because of some interpersonal dynamics and some things that were going on, they're like, we're going to move you to this other position on this other team. It was like a lateral move, essentially. I wasn't going to take a pay cut or anything like that. It would be different. Anyways, they were going to move me. And one of the things that the company that I work for always does is with conversations like that, they always send people home for the rest of the day to think about it. And they sent me home kind of with this, like, we really want you to stay, but we want you to seriously think about if that's something you can have your heart in or not. And I remember going home and sitting, and I started praying about it. And there was a point where I was kind of looking at it, and I was like, oh my gosh, the thing that I've said for like 6 months is that this one project is why I'm still here. And I literally just had that project taken out of my hands. Like, I don't have a choice anymore. I'm not working on this project. I can stay at the same company, but I can't stay on the project that I really care deeply about. And I liked the company, but the thing
Yeah.
I've been saying is the project.
Yeah.
And
That's so funny,
Go
because
ahead.
I just think about the woman at the well and the question that Jesus put to her. He's like, go get your husband, you
Yeah.
know? And she's like, ugh. Obviously, you know me and, all my things. And so God just kind of did the same thing with
Yeah.
you. He's
Yes.
like, okay, so how about that job?
Right.
And then you're like, what job?
Yes. Yes.
So that's pretty cool.
Well,
God's
and
just so great that way. He just
yeah.
he's not unkind
Hmm.
about what and how he does things, but I do believe that he can do whatever he wants to get our attention,
Oh yeah.
you
Oh yeah.
know? And so that was just the thought. Go ahead, continue.
And on his grace with how he speaks to us as well, I'll get to the punchline in a second because it was very shortly after that that I kind of put in my notice and switched to being a full-time artist. But I remember talking to Lorrie, my wife, I don't know, several months after leaving my job, and I was like, should we have done this sooner? Like, was it just lack of faith or what was it? Like, we saw all these signs along the way. And, one of the things that she said to me that I really loved, I think was very insightful, again, Holy Spirit kind of speaking through her, was God knew that I was going to need all of these nudges. I'm a slow processor.
Hmm.
I like to think about things for a long time before I make decisions. And she was like, I think God knows that. And so I think he was giving you breadcrumbs for months and months and months so that
Yeah,
at the end, it doesn't feel like the rug was just ripped out from underneath you.
absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that's just the goodness of God.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm so glad because I'm like, I don't know how I would have handled that otherwise.
And you probably wouldn't have. You would have, did a panic thing and just went and got
Right.
another 9 to 5er.
Yeah.
And then you'd have
I
been
probably
angry at
would have. Yeah.
God.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I did. Oh gosh, it's funny you say that because I hadn't really thought about it as part of this, but like, um, my company that I was working at before, the company that I left, I'd been at for about 5 years. The company before that literally shut down the department, laid everyone off. It didn't even occur to me at that time that maybe this was a good opportunity to start a business and be a full-time artist. Like it wasn't even on my radar.
Hmm.
And so yeah, like this time around it was like okay, the season was right and the things were happening. So but so I labored over that decision still because it was, I mean, I moved my family to another state because of this job. I
Hmm.
really deeply believed in this job and what they do for people because I think they have a great mission and great products. And at the same time, I felt like I was supposed to start this business. For months in my journaling time, I would feel just this nudge from the Holy Spirit like, go ahead and leave your job and start this business. Uh-oh, did I lose you there? Everything just froze up. Okay. Yeah, we'll just kind of keep
Yep.
going as if nothing happened. I've told the story many, many times, so although usually I don't get a chance to go into this much detail. Um, but I had been journaling for a while in the middle of all this, and not even just in journaling. Sometimes it would be like I'd be sitting in church and worship, and I would just get this nudge like, "Go ahead and start your art business. Like, leave your job. Trust me." And I was like, "This is clearly not God. This is irresponsible." Um, like that was my response to it each time. Was like, "Nope, can't be you. Irresponsible, crazy." This voice in the back of my head's like, that's not how you do it. Um, all the excuses, and and then I'm sitting there on my couch thinking about them sending me home and asking me to think about this, and I was like, this last tie was snipped. I've been hearing this for months in my journaling, and then part of it as well is I had these financial goals. I was like, I want to save this much money before we do a transition. We hadn't met them, but we had gotten fairly close. Um, and I took a step back and I was like, wait a second, hold on. This The Nashville housing market has gone up like a rocket over the last couple of
Yeah.
years. And I started looking at it and I was like, okay, God, if worse came to worse and I had to sell my house because we couldn't make it on the savings that we already have, how much equity do I actually have? What are we talking about here? And I looked at it and I realized that we had so much equity in our house from the market going up, which we've not sold our house. We're still in our house. But I looked at it, I was like, we have so much equity in our house that with the market going up, I could go for years and not make a penny because our expenses are low. We don't have debt other than our mortgage. We don't have any big expenses. We drive cheap cars. So it's like our expenses are really, really low. And I was like, hold on. And this is what I told Lorrie. This is where it kind of slapped me in the face. It's like, I have no reason to say no anymore other than me just being stubborn. Like, all of my excuses are gone. I'm just sitting here like bare, like, okay, God, like, the only reason I can say no at this point is just because I'm being stubborn.
But I think we're all
like
that way.
You've put us in this situation.
Yeah, we're all that way. We put our fleece out before God. God, if you do this, like Abraham did it. God, if you do this, then you are my God. If this happens, then you're my God. It wasn't until much later on in Abraham's story that I'm pretty sure it was Abraham, or maybe it was Moses, but he's like, we won't go. I won't go unless you go with us. Finally he's like, okay, God, I hear you, but you have to be with me. So was there that,
totally.
Was that your well moment when you realized that you came to the end of everything, Isaac, and we're just like, okay, God, I see you. I see your hand in this. I see your provision in this,
Yeah, I think so. And my only hesitation there is just I'm so stubborn. I'm not sure if I've actually gotten past all of my stubbornness in it yet. Like, even this is a year and a half ago, and there's still stuff where I'm like, I don't think I've learned that lesson yet. I think I'm still stubborn. I still think that I don't believe he's going to provide. I still on some level, right? It's like I've removed a bunch of the bricks of this wall, but there's still a couple layers of bricks down there. It's like I can step over it pretty easily, but it's still there, and it still trips me sometimes, right? That's a good metaphor. You can use that if you like. It's fine. But yeah, I got to a point I was like, I have no reason to say no anymore. Why not try? And we were so blessed in that as well. And gosh, even there was other things, like we had dreams around that time that pointed towards making this decision, just all these different things. And we got counsel. I called up a couple people that we respect and talked to them, and we just kind of took a step back and we were like, let's do this. Let's try it. Let's see what happens. And it was scary, but even in the scariness, God met us. Like, I quit my job. Like they gave me an opportunity to switch to another role within the company, right? And I went in and I said, no, I decline. I'm going to be putting in my 2 weeks notice. It ended up being like a month notice because they wanted me to finish out some stuff. But I quit my job, and then they turned around. They're like, you know what? We so respect the way that you've gone through this and what's happened. We want to bless you in this transition. They actually ended up giving me a severance. That was, I forget exactly what it was, but it was very generous. And I shouldn't have gotten anything. I left my job, and they gave me a severance. And so it was one of those things where it's like, oh my gosh, God, you are like so in this. And it's just, it's amazing. And it's amazing to me even just recounting this, because right now, this week, as we're doing this call, I'm in a slump where I'm like, God, are you still in this? Like, what's happening? Like, things don't seem to be happening the way I expect them to happen. And like, where are you, God? And here I am telling all this story. It's like, there were just so many signs that this was the right thing. And I will tell you, we haven't sold our house. Like he has been faithful every single month. And sometimes it's down to the last minute, the very last minute, that something comes through that we didn't expect. But he's been faithful every single month. And it's been pretty amazing.
Well, and that's the power of the testimony. And the cool thing is, you're going to walk away from this interview empowered even more. Because, what is it? That scripture talks about the faith comes by hearing, in the word of our testimony. What is it? Faith? Yeah. Okay, well, so you're hearing yourself tell your own story.
Yes.
And
really, I am. Like, I'm sitting here experiencing that.
So it's
right
like when
now.
we
It's
do that, and that shows the power of our voice. We obviously know that everything God created and did, it was because he spoke. He didn't think the world into existence. He spoke it. And that right there gives power to our voice for positive or negative.
Yeah.
You know? And so when we have the opportunity to encourage ourselves, you know, we should do it. And he's not the God of just enough. You know, he's the God of life abundant. And that's everything.
Yes.
And so what are you going to go make when you get done from here?
Oh gosh, I'm not sure. I've got a couple of commissions I got to finish, and I don't know. I mean, I kind of go back and forth with how much to express what's going on with me spiritually with my art. You know, like I don't know why I do that, and maybe one day I'll kind of settle it, but I kind of go back and forth between, like, sometimes I'll do these paintings that are like an expression of what's going on with me. You know, I've done paintings of doves breaking through clouds. I've done, you know, sometimes when I'm just feeling down and like, where are you, God? I'm doing paintings of like storm clouds and rain in the distance, because it's kind of emotionally what's going on with me. And then sometimes I don't. Sometimes I'm just painting trees and landscapes, but even in that, it's like it's God's creative beauty. And so it's like, kind of the way I see it is that God's created all of it. Anything I can paint is just a copy of what he's done anyways. But yeah.
So do you feel, going back to, and sorry, anybody listening, my dogs, I probably got an Amazon package on the front porch. They're
Mine might start barking in a little while too. We'll see.
Being stupid, so somebody's coming up to the house. But because I was thinking earlier when you said that you've never tied worship and your art together. So do you do, or I'm not going to say do you believe in, but like prophetic art and that kind of thing. Do you see your art kind of like that?
Okay, so let me add a little bit of definition on what I was saying. So, like, more when I was saying that is, for me, the process of creating art has never felt like the process of like participating in worship.
But is it spiritual to you?
I would say that it is. I mean, not everything is. Sometimes I'm just, you know, doing a painting that I'm developing some skill with, right? Because that's part of it. But there are definitely paintings, like I just said, you know, like the painting of like the dove breaking through the clouds. Like I painted that out of a time where I was like, I want to create a physical picture, like a depiction of what I feel like God is telling me right now, that like breakthrough is coming and that he's going to come through, and I want to agree with it in a way by creating this painting. And there have been other times too where I'm creating paintings kind of out of like this, I don't know, like for me painting is more often connected with like a word of insight or something like that than it is like a worship experience. And I don't know how everyone experiences worship and in prophecy and stuff like that, so I don't know if it's the same with other people. But there's definitely been times where I've done a painting because it's like, oh, I feel like I need to make this painting for this person, or this person needs to hear this thing. Like, I do art in that way more so than like worship art. Although I will also say that I also believe that that's just something I haven't really tapped into. I have considered going and setting up an easel in the back of the room during worship or something like that. Really, the two reasons I haven't is, one, because I may not seem it on this call, but like I'm a very naturally timid person. I don't like to be a focal point. You know, I kind of have to like get myself up to that point to where I can do it. But then the other reason is because the church that I attend regularly, they are like at capacity, and like it's hard to even find a seat to sit down, much less a spot to set up an easel. And so it's been one of those things that, like, maybe I need to find a place to go practice it, but that's not something.
I mean, you got really, just, I mean, like during your own time. Okay, so back here again.
No worries.
Commercial break number 2. No, but because I know Matt talks about it a lot too. You know, because people in the group are always like, "How do you make Christian art and all that?" And because I love your art.
Thank you.
I love your just the color choices that you use, and like there are certain people that I can, like you can pick out their art. You can see it in a bunch of, I'm like, oh, okay, that's Isaac's, or that's so and so's. But I also think that there's something of us that we put into it.
Absolutely.
that comes on it. And so when we connect spiritually, so what I mean by prophetic art is you just, because like you've said it, that there are those times that you think somebody needs a picture of something, and you make something and then give it to them. That's all prophetic art is. I'm not saying paint in front of other people and stuff like that. But, and I actually was going somewhere with that before we were so rudely interrupted by the locking up computer.
And I will say that's definitely a thing I try to cultivate. And sometimes it sneaks up on me. Sometimes I don't even realize that I'm doing a piece of prophetic art when I'm doing it, which I think is kind of, for me, that's kind of a thing with my relationship with the Holy Spirit in general. There's so many times where I think I'm just journaling, or I think I'm just taking notes on a thought that I had. And later on, 6 months later, I'm like, oh, that thought wasn't from me. That actually came from God. One point with that, with prophetic paintings that I didn't even realize were prophetic at the time. I almost always do realistic paintings. Lorrie does the abstract paintings. And, but that being said, every now and then I'll do an abstract painting, mostly just because I'm trying to play with getting out of my comfort zone. And sometimes when you're not in your comfort zone, you learn new things. But I did this one abstract painting where I was like, I'm just going to use these colors and play around, and it'll be fun for a couple minutes. And as I started painting it, it started to look like these white pillars and this blue background. And so I kind of developed it a little bit more and put some gold on it, and it was just kind of fun and whatever, not a big deal. And then I put it up at a local coffee shop after doing it. And most of the reason I put it up was just because there's a lot of artists in there. And so when something comes down, if you don't take the space, it's going to go to someone else. So I almost put it there as a placeholder. Well, fast forward to, I don't know how, it was probably a year later. This was a while ago. Just recently, this man messages me on my website, and he's like, hey, not even the painting that I'm talking about, by the way. It's a different painting of mine. It's up at the coffee shop. He messages me, and he's like, hey, my wife and I, our son passed away unexpectedly and tragically. He was only 15 years old. I found out later. And they were like, this painting reminds us so much of him. And this coffee shop is where we've always gone to have we're not going to fight and have a hard time right now. We're just going to sit and relax and be together as they're grieving their son dying. And this painting became part of that for them. And so he reached out to me, and he's like, I really want to get it. I can't afford it. Is there anything you can do? And I ended up just being like, it wasn't that expensive a painting. So I was just like, you can just have it. Oh my gosh, I can't believe what you're going through. But so I get there, which even that painting I think was to some extent like a prophetic painting, because it also had very little to do with my normal style or subject. But I get there, and they're like, oh my gosh, this new painting that you put up underneath your other painting, by the way, wasn't new. It had been there for months and months and months. But I think sometimes it's the Holy Spirit too. They were like, this new painting with the blue and the white and the gold. They were like, oh my gosh. I don't know how you made this, but this is him. Blue is his favorite color, and he loved to wear gold things, and this looks so much like him. And they're like, this is wild and crazy. And I was like, I 100% believe that I made that painting for you and didn't even know it. It's nothing I normally do. It's not the colors I normally do. I don't normally do abstract. And it was the exact right thing for them in that moment. And I'd painted it a year before that. And it's not that I had a crystal ball or knew. And so it was just this crazy connection that was just really cool. And I think that's another example of a prophetic piece of art that I didn't even know was prophetic at the time. I was just playing around, and he used it. So.
Yeah. And as you're talking, I'm thinking back to, the woman at the well, and the premise of this podcast is just finding God in our everyday.
Right.
The things that we think are mundane. You were just playing around with some paint and doing a placeholder, right? How many times did the woman walk to the well to get water?
Yeah.
But it only took that one time. Right? And it wasn't even like you were being like obedient to make a painting, right? It's like you didn't have a dream, you didn't have this big vision of grandeur. God said, He came down to me in a ball of light in my garage studio and said, pick gold and blue. No, you were just being you.
Yep.
And God put Himself on it. And now there's this whole awesome testimony in the story. And the same thing with Fatini, the woman at the well. She was getting water. We don't know why she was there at the middle of the day. She just went to get water. There's 1,000 stories around it and all. But ultimately, she was doing something that she had to do constantly. The everyday walk to the well, but that one day Jesus showed up and was there. And her whole town got saved. And, all of these things. And we don't understand, I don't think we fully understand what impact it has or can have when we surrender our talent. And our gifts. And I'm not even talking for all y'all out there who are like, well, I'm not an artist. It ain't even about being an artist. It's not even what I said. We just surrender our gift and talent, whatever that is. If you're an organizer or if you're a school bus driver or whatever, if it is fully surrendered to God, even the quote mundane tasks of seemingly just things we do every day that we don't even think of, that are so much part of who we are, we do them without thought, become blessings to people. People are good with money, right? They don't even think about it. And all of a sudden they've got this huge ministry that blesses people and teaches people how to use money. Carpet cleaning, whatever. Your talent and something that you just say, okay, God, you know what? I'm gonna be the best this I can be, because it makes me feel good. That's exponential world changing things, And so I'm glad you started doing it.
Well, I think especially in those situations, it's the authentic you, right? When you're really surrendering and using your talent, instead of putting on a mask and pretending you're going to do something else because you think that's the thing that you have to do in order to either be loved or to help someone. Play to your strengths. God gave you strengths for a reason, and He gave somebody else different strengths for another reason. And sometimes you should stop pretending like you should be doing this other thing, because you're actually blocking this other person from being able to minister to that, And
exactly. You're taking up someone else's space, right? You're doing something that you're not supposed to do, and you're taking up a place that somebody else should be in. Because when you left the company that you were working for to be a full-time artist, the person who took your spot could very well be the person who God wanted in that spot. But they couldn't be there till you got gone.
Well, and that's, because again, I had an 11, 12-year career, and I was in upper leadership a lot of it, and I saw a lot of people change hands, and there were so many times where someone would leave and everybody would be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this person's leaving, the whole company's going to fall down, it's like Chicken Little, the sky is falling, and then somehow, over and over and over, the next person that comes in almost always ends up doing a better job. I think there is something to that, of the seasonality of people and being in different roles and being in different places, where I think sometimes change is an incredibly healthy thing. And you're right. Getting the right people in the right spot is really huge. So anyways, I don't know why that tangent came
Yeah.
up, but that thought just came up.
No, you're good with that, because then that also makes me think of back to what you had said earlier about being stubborn, and God has to give you breadcrumbs, and and I think we have to do that. I think some of it is personality, because there are some personalities, the more alpha personalities, even if you're introvert or extrovert, there are still very strong-willed people in both introvert, extrovert, so that it's not even about introvert, extrovert. But, like the woman at the well, 5 marriages, there's a lot in that,
One's enough for me.
Were they her fault? Were they her fault? Were they the men's fault? Did somebody die? And, all the dynamics of that. But also, I wonder, too, were there certain things that she had to go through because of choices she made or didn't make, things thrust upon her? Was she just stubborn enough that God's like, okay, we're going to do this again, until she got to the place in her heart where she could stand at the well and be sassy with Jesus, right? Because she was sassy with Jesus, because she's like, well, you obviously know everything about me, so let's talk about this. She could have been stoned. Why was she even talking to Jesus? Because she was just done. She was done, and I believe that she was at the end of herself. And sadly, better or for worse, a lot of us have to get to that place. It's like, okay, God, you know what? I've counted all my pennies, and like you did, I was like, okay, if I sold my house, I could still do this. Right? And God's like, I didn't ask you to sell your house.
Exactly.
Pretty sure you're not going to have to sell your house, and here you are,
And I think there's totally something to that. Like, sometimes you have to get to the end of your rope. And here's the thing that drives me absolutely crazy about that is I don't think that God does that just because he wants to, like, yank it out of your hands or anything like that. I think that you've got to get to a point where you are willing to say, I cannot do this. Like, it has to be you, God. And that is such a difficult spot to get to. And I mean, I was kicking and screaming the whole way to that spot. And honestly, even now, I still struggle with, like, I'm not sure I'm really putting it in your hand. Like, there was a point, and this is one of those things. It's like I look back and it's like, okay, I think this was prophetic. I wish that it wasn't, but there was a point when we were considering leaving where I felt like God said to me, he's like, I'm going to take you to the end of your savings so that it's me and not your bank account that's doing this. And here I am sitting at the end of that savings, and it's like, okay, God. But even now, like, I was just talking to a friend of mine yesterday who's in a similar spot, and it's like, but even now, there's still like this, like, okay, well, what can I do? Like, I could go get a job and I could do this, or I could, get a loan and do that. And it's like we keep trying to make it about us instead of him, and he doesn't want us to get to the end of our rope because he just wants to be annoying. He just wants us to make it about him instead of about us. Right? Because at the end of the day, whether you like it or not, anything that you still have on that rope is an idol to you. And
oh, for sure.
You could get there a lot faster by just letting go instead of burning it all up.
Yeah. But the thought I just had was a lot of times at the end of that rope is us.
Yeah.
And we become our own idol because we want to save face.
Totally.
We don't want to look bad. All of those things. Yeah. It's, being a human is hard.
It really is. It really is. And I wish that there was like an easy button for it, but at the same time, like, we see it over and over again in scripture, like people having to be humbled and then lifted, like it's part of the human condition, and I'm in the middle of it. And so there's a lot of days where I'm like, wow, this is still really hard. But I do believe that one day I'll get to the other end of it and be like, I am so thankful for all the hard times that I went through. I am thankful now.
Well, it's just a better testimony.
Yeah,
it's just a deeper testimony. So what would be just a few last words you'd want to leave with the listeners, like kind of wrapping up everything that we've talked about? like from your journey. So is it that? Is it just surrender sooner? Don't be stubborn.
I mean, I think what I would say is if you feel like you have a calling on your heart from God to do something, and I believe that's a real thing. I don't know theologically if everyone has one of those or if not everyone has. I don't know. But if you feel like you have a calling on your heart from God, like, take steps. Because where this all started, like, really snowballing for me, right? It's a snowball. It starts really small and, like, suddenly it's really big. Where this really started snowballing for me is when I started taking intentional steps, even though some of them were, like, not necessarily things that I was trying to do, and, like, my wife kind of dragged me into it. Once I started taking those steps, like, each step you can see something different, and you get to that next step and you're like, oh, like, maybe you can do this. Maybe that thing that you thought was going to be a problem. And then you take the next step and you're like, oh, there's other people that are doing this. And I just met some of them and they're doing just fine. And they're living full lives and they're happy. And then you take the next step and you're like, oh, maybe God is going to take care of that thing that I did. You know, just take those little steps into it, even if you don't necessarily know how it's going to end. And I don't know if it's right or wrong for everyone to quit their job and jump right into it. I don't know. I honestly go back and forth on that sometimes, like whether or not I would recommend that to people. But what I can recommend is, like, take steps into what it is that he's called you in and see where he takes it. Because he might very quickly, like he did with me, turn it into something much, much bigger. But I'll also say that when he did it with me, he was very faithful of it was not nearly as hard of a transition as I expected it to be. He showed up in a lot of unexpected ways and kind of paved that path for me.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. Yeah, you just one step at a time. I think we get overwhelmed with. Yeah, that's a whole nother podcast, because we get overwhelmed with comparison and just all the things that just keep us shut down.
And for the 11 years that I felt guilty about it, that was my biggest thing I kept going to, is I was like, okay, God, I've got this vision from you. I'm going to plan this whole thing out and figure out how to make all of it work. And then I'm going to take a first step.
And then I'll do it.
And guess what? Never happened. You know, I never got it all planned out, and I never took that first step. So.
Yeah. And we never will, because God is just so organic. Yeah. Everything is organic, and it changes as it grows. And, you know, art isn't what art was in the Renaissance, or, you know, we're not painting on cave walls anymore. You know, it's just taking just the simplicity of art. And now we have AI and all of the things. And so you couldn't have planned that out. You can't see. Right. We can never see. I mean, anyway, like I said, that's a whole nother talk. Is the comparison and just trying to have it all figured out. Well, my friend, where can listeners reach you guys? What is your website and stuff?
Yeah, so we have a joint website. So our website is fowlerartwork.com. That's F as in Frank. I clip my letters a little bit, so sometimes people think I'm saying Sowler, but it's Fowler. You know, avoid the snare of, people always turn around and snicker at me on those church days when that verse is read. So it's fowlerartwork.com, and you can find both of us on there and a bunch of stuff about us. And if that's the one thing you take away from it, all of our Instagram and Facebook is on there too. But then my Instagram and Facebook is Isaac Fowler Art. That's where I post a lot of things from time to time. But I'll be honest, most of our stuff is live in person. So I keep social media, I keep the website, but I don't necessarily update it all the time. So, but that's where you can find us.
That should probably change. So you can get some commission work and stuff. Yeah, because that's going to be fun. All right. Well, listeners, thank you for joining us today. We had a good time, even though the computer crashed 3 times and we had to restart. There's some behind-the-scene information for you. So if you are on any of the platforms listening to this, please like it, love it, share it. We appreciate the engagement, because it helps us play the algorithm games of social media and the platforms and the marketing and all of that kind of thing. And just tell me what you think. If you got any questions, hit us up. If we talked about anything or said anything that, made you have some questions, contact me, ask me. Let's have a conversation about it. Let's start a dialogue and see where we go from there. Isaac, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And I'm excited about having Lorrie on next week. That's going to be really fun, too. I'm going to ask her version of your story.
I was about to say, you should make sure to ask her to go into this, too, because she'll probably bring things up that I didn't even think to bring up, because, it's very multifaceted. There's a lot of angles on that part of our testimony.
For sure. And we all have our own perspective, so... All right, my friend, thank you so much. Thank you again, listeners, for joining in and connecting and just giving me your support. I really, really appreciate it. And until next time, be good. And if you can't be good at it. So... Thanks for joining us on today's episode of After the Well. We hope you really liked it. We would love to hear your feedback. Give us some likes, some reviews, some love. Share it with your friends. All the links and information are in the comments or in the show notes of the episode that you're currently listening to. Thanks, and we look forward to hanging out with you again.